experience. I think, Gerry, I just remember hearing that when you tripped to Italy, one of your first games in charge went a bit haywire before trying to get to the ground and stuff like that. Was that when Italy did something to us?
It was a celebrated trip for all the wrong reasons. That we were delayed in Heathrow for 6 hours or something ridiculous. Then we weren't able to train because the pitch, there were potholes all over the pitch, you couldn't train. And then the coach to bring the team to the ground, the coaches didn't appear. And there was a great bit of entertainment where the manager of the team at that particular time was the great N.A. Murphy, Noel Murphy. And Noel was out on the main road outside the hotel trying to flag down taxis to get the team to the ground. So it was a complete and utter shambles from start to finish. And look, it was one of these, it was a sort of somebody had the bright idea, we'll play an extra game. And we met in Heathrow. People flew into Heathrow from Cork and Dublin and England and everywhere, and then stood around Heathrow for 6 hours, and then went over on the Friday and didn't play. Funnily enough, so it was a shambles. But it was one of you just. And they actually had at that stage they had a very reasonable team. They've gone down fairly heavily since then. I don't know what. It's very difficult to know how they can really, because they don't have Joe mentioned earlier on. I don't think it's worth saying again. There's a very great similarity between kids playing rugby in New Zealand or youth rugby in New Zealand and rugby in Ireland, bearing in mind that rugby is the key game. And there's a simple example in Ireland. The rugby in New Zealand is like hurling in Kilkenny, where that's the fantastic ability to coach kids and play the game and play other games as well. And we are dependent on our schools and our clubs. And I just don't, the worry for Italy is that they don't have this tradition. They have club rugby, but it's not, it can't support really an international team. And they're really struggling in the professional game at the moment. And I'm not sure, it's a two-edged sword here. The World Rugby has to try and spread the game and improve the game in a worldwide sense. But it's very difficult to know how, if you drop it down from the 8th, 9th, 10th into that area there, how to support, because it's about competition, it's about the background to the game and the people playing the game. Now Japan have suddenly changed, or there's always been huge rugby in Japan, and you could see them becoming, hugely getting better and better and better. But it's very difficult to see Italy how they're going to do it. I don't know how they're going to do it because there isn't that background. You can go to, if you take last Friday, I mean, literally Leinster's fourth team put 40 points on them. So that is a worry. But we had a very good weekend that weekend in Italy when we finally got there, Moggy.
You enjoyed it,
and it was very unlike. And like Joe says, as the coach, the fact that I hadn't booked the tickets or ordered the buses or whatever, I am to blame for all this, I can tell you. And everybody is ducking and diving. And whereas if you win, you're surrounded by committee men. At this stage, there wasn't a blazer in sight, and it certainly was. It's a good learning experience.
And how do you, within World Rugby, Joe, obviously your role would be to develop the developing nations as well and stuff like that. And there seems to be a couple of bright sparks that likes of Georgia have improved anyway, with the help of Tedo, the Terranir 10. And Italy, is it right? Would you feel that if there was a promotion relegation into the Six Nations, that would help teams develop? Or do you think having Italy in a tournament where unfortunately they have some very talented and I think their two halfbacks are super players, but is it going to help develop the game if they keep struggling to keep in touch with teams by half time?
Yeah, it's a tough one, Moggy. I think they've got a really good coach in Franco Smith. I think Franco is a really good thinker of the game. He speaks Italian, even though he's South African, and so I think he's really astute. And I'd hope that you mentioned they're 9 and 10. They're kids, really. They're fresh out of the under-20s, and so their development over the next couple of seasons, I think if people can just be a little bit patient with them. They've got some good loose forwards like Pelledri, obviously, Negre. Mbamba came on and did a really good job. He almost got away down the right-hand touch there to score, and he's quite explosive. But they lack the sort of depth and quality of player that the other nations in the Six Nations have. So it's going to be a battle for them. And Georgia, they have their own battles, just trying to keep their organisation afloat and organised. They've just had an election for their governance, and so they're just starting to get themselves organised again. But that may take a while. Because what people don't see is that there's a lot that goes on behind teams now, particularly in the professional era, and it's not just about having the players available. I think it's something like 24% of all professional rugby players now are Polynesian, and yet the 3 Polynesian countries that are at the height of world rugby, Fiji, Samoa, and Tonga, most of their players play overseas because there's no professional competition for them. So, there's lots of complications for all sorts of countries, and even more so than ever after COVID. Decimating club competitions. There's no amateur rugby in most countries in the world. I think, apart from New Zealand and Australia, I don't think there's any amateur rugby being played around the world. I know that the MLR in the US is about to get underway, so we'll see how they go. I think they've had a strong vaccination program, but there's still a lot of COVID-19 in the US, so it's a really complicated time.
And with the new deal for the Six Nations, will that bring it further away from the other countries, or will it? How is there any of that money will be used to sort of promote rugby or televised rugby in other smaller nations, or will the gap will just get bigger, will it?
Well, I'm not sure, Moggy. The Six Nations operate independently to World Rugby, albeit they have to follow the same rules that everyone agrees to, and World Rugby just really facilitate that as a governing body. Just like most governing bodies, the actual competitions are owned by the nations who run them. So Six Nations own that. CVC have a 1%, a 1/7 share of that now, by the sound of things. But I mean, it is timely for those nations because they're all feeling the pinch, because revenues have plummeted, because there's no gate sales, sponsorship is less, broadcast money is less. So, for the professional game, it's complicated. But as I said, the amateur game is what we need to resuscitate and get started as soon as we possibly can. Once we can get some freedom from the pandemic.
Yeah, well, they're obviously in Ireland, within Leinster particularly, there would be a huge swell of opinion to try and get back on the pitch. And it's Gerry was just talking earlier before you came on that there's a big play to get the Leinster School Senior Cup played when we're allowed play, and the Junior Cup, I think, Gerry, as well, is it?
Well, it's not so much. It would be great to get because of the traditions in the cup, and it's such a big competition. But it's to get the kids out playing, full stop. And the schools committee, I know, are very keen to try and organise something after the Leaving Cert, maybe in either June or maybe August, as Brian was saying earlier on. And I think that I would agree totally with Joe that people in governing bodies tend to say that the professional game pays for everything. But that's actually quite disingenuous, because the professional game pays for the professional game. It doesn't pay for anything else. So we must try and encourage what is the traditions of the game, because we wouldn't have a professional game without the schools and the clubs, full stop. You know, and if the IRFU or the New Zealand Rugby Union stop giving money to the clubs, the little bit they do give, the clubs would still carry on themselves. I mean, it's totally ingenuous to say, it's this money runs rugby. It runs professional rugby, and that's the danger I think in the Northern Hemisphere now, is with the new, and Gordon Darcy was writing actually very well about it during the week, that we're getting to a stage now where if you want to watch a rugby match, you're going to have 5 different Sky, Premier, Hoochie Coochie, or whatever they're calling the bloody thing. So there's not everybody in the world can afford 200 quid a week just to watch rugby. So I don't know how much thought. I mean, people say, "Oh, well, that's never going to happen." Well, like, it's already happened. So it's.
Sorry, Moggy, I have to jump off. I've got a 9 a.m. meeting. So, Gerry, great to see you. I'll catch you for a coffee later in the year.
Yes,
when I'm finally allowed to get back up. Yeah. Moggy, good to see you, Brian.
Yeah, thanks, Joe.
I think you totally underrate your career. So humble as you are, well done on what you did achieve and what you're doing at Michael's. So I will see you guys later. And
just a quick before you go, Joe, predictions on next week, Ireland or England.
Yeah, sorry, I've got to go, Moggy. Yeah, an Ireland win at the Aviva. I think they're gathering momentum. Great kick from Johnny to win. After Scotland, they're no mugs. They did really well. They've already beaten England, so why don't we join the party and try to do the same thing in good fashion? So I'll certainly be watching. I'll see you guys later.
Thanks, Joe.
Cheers.
And Gerry,
finish off there.
Yep. Yeah.
On club rugby, the biggest thing I see with club rugby is the lack of media exposure. So the best days of my career, 100%, were playing for Cork Con and the AIL. Amazing trips. But you always got exposure, whether it was in the media, radio stations, there was some games live. And if you're a young player coming out of schools, you're in the media, there's supplements, you're just all over the place, social media. And then you go to play your club under 20s and nobody watches you. You're getting no media exposure. There's no match reports. So people love some sort of extrinsic motivation or even just publicity. And it really angers me when I see even RTE come in and they parachute in for the AIL final. Like, watching one game doesn't make you buy into a club's game. Come to more games, promote more games on radio. And I think, as you're saying, the lack of respect by the media particularly is really hurting the club game. And I think if they need to expose a bit more, I think it would really help.
Yeah, and I actually think, Brian, it's probably something that we may discuss on a later show of Crouch, Pause, Engage. And Brian, your prediction for the weekend?
Yeah, I think with Joe, momentum's massive in sport, and that last kick is going to be a great week's training for Ireland. Obviously, England had a good week win as well, but I think Ireland's in a very tight game.
And Gerry?
You'd like to think that we can win. I'd say it'll be very difficult.
So that's a no.
No, it's very difficult. Did you study English in your college?
I wasn't in for that class. I was at the
No, you missed that class, did you? Yeah. No, I mean, it'll be very difficult.
Yeah.
I just think that a lot will. There are a couple of very good pointers where our pack will be just as good as theirs. Our lineout is better than theirs. Our scrum will be fine. It's what we do with the ball when we get it. If we just continually go through the phases, we're wasting our time against them. We'll have to think a little bit more like France play against them, where you're going to kick properly, you're going to kick well. Because if we just go through phrase after phrase after phrase, we won't beat them. We have to do something out of the ordinary.
Yeah. Okay, listen, we're going to wrap up.
I think
Sorry, Brian.
would say, I think England are still struggling because like the Saracens issue is still not settled. Like English rugby has torn itself apart with the Saracens. Like it was almost like club eat club. The whole lot of them ganged up, and Saracens have been everything to English rugby: coaching, style of play, just innovation in the game, the amount of coaches that have went on. And I think just the fact that they've been devoured by every other club, there's still something rotten in the state of English rugby, I think. So I fancy Ireland.
Great. Listen, guys, we're going to wrap it up there, and thank you for the first edition of Crouch, Pause, Engage, and we'll definitely have you back.
I'm glad you got it right that time, Muggy.
Yeah, they won't have to edit this bit, I hope. Thanks a lot, guys.